Welcome to Living Your Greatness. Each episode, we bring on great people to inspire you to achieve your greatness. We discuss topics all related to health and wellness. Listen to world-class stories, learn valuable lessons, and turn knowledge into action. It is now time for you to unlock your inner greatness. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Ben Mummy, and today we have a new guest to the show, and her name is Camille Charbonneau. So for those of you that don't know Camille, she is a mental performance consultant with a master's degree in performance and sports psychology. Her mission is to teach high-level performers the important role that mental skills training has on performance. Camille has worked with musicians, athletes, coaches, children, and business leaders. So Camille, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Super pumped to have you on. So let's kind of get kicking here. If we could just talk, Camille, tell us about yourself. Where did you spend, your formative years growing up in Canada? And what inspired you to become a mental performance consultant?
All right. Where do I start? So I grew up in Laval. I started sports, I think, the age of 5. I've always been in something. So I remember my parents putting me into ballet for a year, which I changed right away. In elementary, I did some handball, some track. In high school, I did basketball, rugby. So just growing up, sport was a big part of my life. And I knew that, I wanted to always pursue a career in that domain. And so after high school, being in sport was one thing else, but I also I always had a passion for art. So after high school, I wanted to get into graphic design. So I went into communications at Vanier. And then I applied to Concordia in graphic design, did not get accepted. That kind of crushed me, but I went into art history for a year to kind of, build a portfolio and try and get back into it. But during that time, a friend from high school had called me. He was in the phys ed program at McGill, and he was like, look, you need to come to this program. You'll love it. It's obviously phys ed is around sports. So he really persuaded me, because what happened was I immediately, I did a year at Concordia, but then I applied to the phys ed program and I got in. So I switched to McGill. I never thought I would end up teaching or coaching, because I grew up very shy, very introverted. And again, I was in phys ed because it was sport related. I'm like, okay, this is great. This is probably better than art history. And during those years, I did have sports psychology classes that I was super interested in, but I was never interested in doing the research or a PhD. During that time, I was also a personal trainer. So, I did that for 9 years. I played rugby as well. So kind of all over the place, but always in the health and fitness world. And so what happened was, after my phys ed degree, I knew that I wanted to stay in school, but I also knew that I didn't want to teach full-time in a school, because, in Quebec, it's hard to get a full-time position as a physical educator. You usually have to teach other subjects, and I knew I didn't want to do that. And then someone in my program was like, there's a program in Ottawa, a master's in sport management, and there could be an opportunity, to be in the Olympic committee or something. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Let's do that. And they only accept 15 people, but they accepted both of us. So now I'm moving to Ottawa to do my master's in sport management, because, again, something in sport, but so we'll see how it is, right? And I hated it. It was just business related to sport, but I stuck with it for a semester because I tried out for the varsity rugby team, and I made it. So I wanted to play varsity rugby, because at McGill I never got a chance to, because they practice so far. But I stuck to it. And during that time, that first semester, I had a class with the students in the master's in the sports psychology program. And it was with Terry Orlick, who is, I don't know if you've heard of him before. He's pretty well known in our field, in Canada anyway. And fortunately, he left us in the last year. But in that class, he was talking about all his work with Olympic athletes and these, high level athletes in terms of mindset. And it just blew my mind, because from all the years that I was playing different sports, no one ever mentioned like this idea of training your brain or doing all these different strategies to help the mental performance. And so I decided that that's what I wanted to do. And it was interesting because it wasn't a PhD. Now it's a master's program, 1.5 years, and it's more applied, more hands-on, which was something that interested me. That was more of interest to me. So I finished the semester, did the rugby season, came back to Montreal for the remaining semester to reapply in the fall. They only accept 15 people. I got in again, and that was great. So then I moved back there, and during this time, I was playing rugby for also a summer league, and I got hurt. So I fractured my fibula the first game, like first 5 minutes. And anyway, coming back from that was really hard. I was always scared to get hurt again. And yes, I was learning sports psychology, but I still didn't have the tools and strategies that I do now. And so what happened was I ended up quitting rugby anyway. And like I mentioned, it's something that I invested my time into for 10 years. And so during the master's program, it became, my mission to not only help other athletes, realize that this is something they can train, but also to help other athletes continue to have fun in sport. I was fortunate enough to find a passion in Olympic weightlifting, which I now compete in. I'm part of the running community, but there's a lot of stories where athletes get hurt or end up stopping and don't find something else. So so because of my injury and because of all these things I was learning, I really just wanted to now educate not just athletes, but even the general population of how mindset skills and strategies can help us show up at our best and have fun with things that we usually put too much pressure on. So I finished the program in 1.5 years. I graduated in I think it was 2016. So I've been in the field for about 6 years now. I quit my personal training job last fall after 9 years to fully focus on the mental skills consulting, which was, I wish I did that a few years ago, because now I can fully focus on it and really, build my business and build relationships and start other projects. So, so that's how I got to where I am now.
Awesome, Cam. Yeah, thanks for giving us a background of how your story evolved. It's always interesting to hear how someone finds their passion, that fuels them, and hearing about, that moment when you learned about mindset and you started to, get really attracted to learn more about it, right? Because someone's mindset for mental performance in any domain, not only sports, right? But even, a musician, kind of like I said in your intro, right? It's so important to have, right? Those skills to keep grounded, to keep relaxed, keep calm, so we can perform our best, right? So something that I want to lead to next is, I think it's really important, for my audience to get a better understanding of a role of a mental performance consultant. My understanding, a mental performance consultant works with individuals to improve their mental fitness, facilitating the development of mental skills and strategies. So what else could you tell us that I'm missing here about your profession?
Right. So I think, that's a good start. I think what a big piece specifically of how I coach or educate is how to apply these skills to also a personal life, right? So, I work with a lot of student athletes, and at the end of the day, they're students before athletes, and we're people before we're performers, right? And if, everything is connected, and yes, we can just talk about how to improve performance on the field, on the ice, on stage, but if something else is going on in our personal life, it's most likely going to affect our performance. So these different tools and strategies, like you said, how to get grounded, how to stay calm, energy management, self-talk, confidence. A big part of, at least, like I said, how I like to coach is seeing the athlete or the performer as a person first, and then teaching them how to translate these skills to every aspect of life, right? Because when I started off, I would just connect the skills to performance on the field, but there's a huge piece missing there. So you evolve, you grow as you get experience, and so that's That's my way of coaching, and not everyone does it that way, and that's fine. And because I have a background in personal training, you develop relationships with your clients, you get to know them on a really personal level. And so that experience or background, really made me understand that how important it is to understand the person in front of me as a person first and not just an athlete. So I don't know if you want me to be specific about the tools and strategies too yet, but
I think that's a good start. And I actually want to highlight that you said, the person first approach. I think that could be applied even at work, right? Putting the person before the worker, putting the person before the athlete, kind of like you said, especially in your domain, right? That's most of the people that you've worked with. And I think that's something too that on some of my previous episodes, when I've had Olympians on, we've actually spoken about that. Like we've spoken about the human side of like the athlete or the human side of like the person, right? So I love that. I love that. So something that I do want to kind of transition to is I know you've helped many high level athletes, to enhance their mental fitness skills so that they can feel confident, unlock their full potential and overcome any mental challenge. But something that I'm curious about, and I'm sure my listeners would like to hear more about this, is what are some of the most common mental performance challenges?
That's an interesting question because most people who come to see me know they want to work on their mindset, but they don't necessarily know exactly what. So it's very rare that someone will come to me and be like, okay, I need to work on this, right? But if that is the case, usually what comes up is the confidence piece, performance anxiety, managing stress, whether it's before a performance or during. So I think, a classic example would be, how to stay confident even after a mistake, or how to show up prepared and calm before this, high pressure situation. So yeah, definitely confidence. And with that, self-talk comes up. But something that I bring up with all the people that I work with, the first foundational piece we always will work on will be self-awareness. So just getting them to reflect more on their behaviors, their way of thinking, because, mindset, we don't learn this in school, unfortunately, right? Unless you were fortunate enough to maybe work with a sports psych or mental skills consultant or have a coach that would talk about it or be in a workshop with the team. Most people don't know much about it. So, which means it's not normal for people to challenge their way of thinking, right? And why they behave a certain way when something happens. So for me, it's always about teaching people how to reflect through journaling, through speaking, through tracking, logging, and usually through that, then we can kind of pinpoint what to tackle next, whether it's confidence, whether it's focus, whether it's, it's interesting because all these things come hand in hand, but usually after the reflection for about 2 weeks, we gather a lot of information and data. So then we can do another assessment and see like, okay, what do we need to prioritize first? And usually it's emotion management. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And it's funny that you mentioned like the whole reflection piece, especially at the start, because it made me think back even when I worked with a career performance coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at the start, right? Like you don't always know what's missing, right? That gap that you're trying to fill or that you're trying to improve. You have some ideas, but you really don't know what the root cause is. And I remember the first, I would say 2 to 3 weeks was just full out, answering a lot of questions, doing a lot of different exercises and stuff that really challenged me. And I learned so much about myself. Right. Yeah. And then eventually we were able to pinpoint, okay, this is kind of like the route that we have to take and go forward with. So I appreciate you for highlighting that. Something that I do want to move to is when we talk about mental performance, there's a lot of different areas that we could kind of pinpoint. And so one of the first ones that I want to talk about, you actually briefly mentioned it before, and I kind of want to dive deeper there, is energy management, right? So when we look at some of the best athletes who use mental skills and strategies to manage and optimize their mental and physical energy, they actually have good energy management. Something that I've either experienced myself when I was a high level athlete or that I've seen through even colleagues through work or just many different domains is either overtraining or overworking and having that syndrome. When your training or your overworking outpaces, your rest and kind of like your recovery, that could eventually lead to burnout. And I'm sure you've dealt with a case like this before. What are some mindset strategies to help athletes avoid and deal with burnout?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I myself went through it last fall. So this goes back to the self-awareness piece too, right? Especially like because we want to prevent it right before it happens. And so it's worth asking, and what I sent a team I'm working with this mini podcast on like consistency versus intensity. And I thought that it was great. And the whole idea was for them to think about, okay, when are times to be like do work consistently well, and then what are times to actually go intense, because we can't go 100% or 110% all the time, right? And so it's interesting because it challenges their way of thinking. And if you're young, you might not believe in the consistency, or you might believe that being intense 100% consistently is okay. But then you get older or something happens and you figure out, actually no, it's not sustainable, because that was my way of thinking until I overtrained, I overworked last fall, and I was like, okay, well, something needs to change. And you hear it, but until it happens to you, like, you think you're you're Superman or Superwoman. But I think a big piece is thinking about boundaries, right? So actually, when are occasions where you do need to put in more work or more intensity? When are days that you have to pull back a bit? And you also have to consider what else is going on in your life, right? Because a lot of high performers and athletes like to be intense or go 100% in everything. And that was the case for me. And with most of the athletes I work with, especially student athletes, like you can't be 100% at work, at school, at sport. Like at some point, something's going to give. And so what I like to do is offer, journal prompts or some type of system. Everyone works differently, right? I really don't like the cookie cutter approach. Although the basic mental skills stay the same for the people I work with, I do like to adapt to the people I work with. So we end up making a system where they can kind of create this feedback mechanism to not only set intentions for their energy levels and set boundaries, but also, a system that allows them to review that consistently and adjust, right? Because, the summer for most student athletes is a bit easier, right? They can maybe handle a little bit more things. Maybe they only focus on their sport. But then when the fall comes around, you can see it's like it's very hectic. So this is when, it would be of interest to adjust boundaries, to rethink how you want to show up. So again, like I said, it comes back to the reflection piece, but specifically that kind of feedback mechanism or system that you want to create to check in with yourself, because you don't want to wait till you're burnt out, because then you can't show up and you can't help people and you can't be at your best. And so, I specifically got the Whoop band. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a recovery tool. Okay, I need to I need to share some links with you, but so the Whoop band is a recovery tool. It was made for professional athletes. I don't know how many years ago, but only recently in the last few years, they made it public. And so basically it measures your heart rate variability, and you wake up with a recovery score. But the whole idea is that you're not counting calories or your steps. You're really paying attention to your recovery. And I got the Whoop when I literally hurt myself every year. And I swear I learned my lesson this time, but the Whoop has helped me make better decisions, because I have the data in front of me. We all know that alcohol or eating before bed affects our sleep and stuff like that, or when we're sore. But until it's like in front of you sometimes and you see the data, then only then you can change, right? So for me, the Whoop band has been a great tool for me to just reflect and make better decisions, so I don't continue overtraining like I've been doing for years. And it's really helped me the last like 2-3 years I've had it. So that would be, it's an interesting tool if you want to check out.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing all those tools, from journal prompts to then the Whoop band, as well as even I think the biggest thing is having that self-awareness, right? Being aware and finding a way to track, your kind of energy level. Because I know I think probably a lot of people listening to this are all guilty of over saying yes. And I think that's another thing that I want to add is being okay with saying more no's. And that kind of connects to your other aspect of setting boundaries, right? So something that I want to move to here is the second mental performance topic that I really want to talk about is self-talk. So being aware of your self-talk during and after training and competition is essential for creating and maintaining optimal performance. So if we look at athletes like Kobe Bryant, he was a leader in this, right? When it came to mindset and demonstrating, his very strong mental performance there. So athletes that engage in this, they usually say things like, keep going or focus on your form or I'm feeling strong, even if they feel like they're, hurting. What are different ways someone can use self-talk positively to regulate their thoughts and emotions to help them reduce stress and anxiety?
The first step, again, is the self-awareness to recognize when the self-talk shifts, right? So first, when does it start to become negative? So this could simply look like an exercise of someone journaling out different situations in the week where they noticed that their self-talk became more negative. On the flip side, I would also ask someone to recognize when it's more positive. Like, what are you telling yourself? What does that conversation look like? Because we want to use that again. And so, you just mentioned some kind of like, I guess, more motivational self-talk, but there's two types of positive self-talk, and there's motivational, like you mentioned, like, I got this, I can do this. And some people need to kind of fake it till they make it. But honestly, most people that I work with, that doesn't work. Like, they literally need to have the confidence to believe something, to say something. So if it's not motivational, it's going to be more technical. So this is when we use cues or words that help us just refocus on the task, which still helps us move forward, right? Because when we know that when we're in a negative headspace or when we have that negative inner coach, we get stuck, right? There's resistance. We're not moving forward. We're stuck in the past or the future of what if. And I can relate this to emotion management as well, because usually when we get negative self-talk, some type of emotion is coming over us, whether it's frustration, anxiety, stress. So back to that first piece is, again, recognizing when does that self-talk start to shift? What do you feel? What's happening? So now we can start to plan and prepare for, like, next time this happens, what are some words or cues, or sometimes it's a physical thing that we do to shake it off or just shift. And so I do this activity with a lot of endurance athletes that I got from a book called Calm the F Down. The brave athlete, calm the F down and rise to the occasion. And it's called segmentation. And so basically, for example, for like a marathon, you would segment the different pieces of the race. So obviously it depends per person, but let's say we separated every 5K. The idea is to write, okay, what are some negative thoughts or worries that might come up that will come up in like certain parts of the race or event? And then what are those motivational or technical cues or more positive self-talk thoughts that you can use to replace this negative inner coach when it comes up? And so just having this plan and discussing it like verbally usually helps people to manage it a lot better, because in the moment when we make a mistake, what for most people it's challenging because we just get consumed in our emotion and we just react, and it's almost impossible to think in the moment of a positive word or something that can help us unless it's planned, unless like you visualized it or you prepared it in advance. So doing a simple segmentation exercise like that can really help someone. And just like you would practice physical and technical skills, this is where like you need to practice this in training as well. So what I tell my athletes and clients that I work with is the same thing. Like, you can't expect for this, word or mantra or cue to work for the first time in a game. Like, yes, we're planning for it, but you need to practice it so it becomes more automatic, instead of your automatic brain taking over when you get consumed with emotion.
Awesome. Yeah, no, those are some really good tips. I think learning how to identify those is key. Something that I do want to move to though is, Another key mental performance topic that I think is really key for a lot of people to think about is emotional control, right? Because if you think about it, it is essential for us to be able to identify, any mental breakdowns, that cause you to lose your emotional control, right? For example, for an athletic performance, right? For an athlete, learning how to gain emotional control so they could keep grounded and heighten their overall performance. So I actually did some research for this interview, and some of the top mental breakdowns that cause athletes to lose their composure are perfectionism, irrational beliefs, fear of failure, social approval, worrying too much about what others think, and dwelling on errors. How can athletes overcome some of these mental breakdowns by learning how to identify, regroup, and refocus their emotional control?
Yeah, those are some great examples you just mentioned there. And I want to kind of put everything under the umbrella of mindfulness and meditation and how that could help with being aware and accepting and refocus. And so meditation and mindfulness really changed my life. I took a course after I graduated my master's. I did, I don't know if you've heard of that famous 8-week Mbsr class. So it's a mindfulness-based stress reduction class by John Kabat-Zinn. It's really popular. It was first created to help with chronic pain in hospital settings. And eventually they saw how useful it could be for stress management and emotion management. And so I did the course where we learned about mindfulness and the benefits of meditating. And, there's research that shows that 30 minutes of meditation a day for 8 weeks literally changes the brain, like your prefrontal cortex grows. And so during this 8-week period, I meditated for 30 minutes a day. I did the homework because I'm a good student. But I'm telling you, it changed my life. Like in those 8 weeks, I realized how much of an anxious person I was. I became very aware of my thoughts, of my behaviors. And I want to relate this to focus on what you said, because ultimately, we create stories in our head, the fear of failure, these irrational beliefs, the perfectionism. We do these things because of the stories that we create most of the time. And so again, the first step is to notice that. And through meditation and mindfulness exercises, we can be with our thoughts and recognize that we are creating these irrational thoughts or stories. And then from there, it's again, using the meditation mindfulness practice to learn to accept them. So a lot of people tend to kind of resist it, or usually they resist the idea of certain things happening to them. But once we get to accept an emotion, it's easier to move through, right? So for example, if we drop the ball on the field, we made a mistake. Well, we have two choices. We can get caught up in the mistake and stay frustrated and be like, oh, I shouldn't have done this. Because maybe I'm a perfectionist and it shouldn't be this way. And I have all these high expectations. Or we can accept that, okay, I dropped the ball. Now, it wouldn't benefit me to focus on this. There's a time and place for everything. Now, how can I refocus my thoughts on the next task instead? But bigger picture, obviously, it's, our perspectives have to be changed as well. We have to see that mistakes are part of growing and all this. And we could talk about growth mindset as well. But the mindfulness and meditation practice essentially helps you recognize, accept without judgment. So without saying, oh, I shouldn't have done it. It's like, okay, it's fine. I did this. And then it also helps you refocus on the next thing. So the way I learned it, if you want to kind of put an image to it, is you can see a distracting thought as a cloud that comes by, and usually the cloud stays there and it gets bigger and it starts to rain and a storm comes because we create the story. But are we able just to observe the cloud or the thought and let it just pass through? Again, there's a time and place for everything. I understand for high performers or for anyone, yes, you want to analyze the mistake or the error, but most of the time, when it's during a game or a high pressure situation, that's not the moment, right? So I would say getting into a meditation practice can be so powerful. And I know a lot of people see meditation as maybe something to do to relax before bed. Sure, yes, for sure, it can help one calm down and ground and relax. But how I teach it is that it's as a separate tool. It can be used to train your brain exactly what, like I said, to be aware, accept without judgment, and to refocus. And the more you get in those reps during the meditation exercise, the more you'll see it will trickle into everyday life, into sport. And, I'll never tell the people I work with to meditate for 30 minutes a day every day. That's just ridiculous. Like most people won't do that. But, minimum 2 to 5 minutes, 3-4 times a week can turn into 10 minutes once they recognize the benefits. And usually people tell me they see a difference in their focus skills and just their ability to be aware of their thoughts within like 3-4 weeks. Yeah, for me, that is a foundational piece of learning how to manage emotions. But when we talk about creating stories and having irrational beliefs, a lot of that is about perspective too, right? And so how do we change perspective? And that's tough. I wish I can just wave my wand and help people change their way of seeing things. But usually that comes from, a personal experience, usually something like a struggle or a challenge. Sometimes it comes from listening to the right thing or reading the right thing or having a conversation, right? So, there are times where I talk to people about tools and strategies, but sometimes they just need to go through the experience to realize, okay, well, I think I need to change the way I see this, which kind of goes back to our conversation earlier about overtraining, right? Some people don't change the lens they see life through until they get hurt, and that's just the reality. And I think that's okay too, because those experiences hopefully will help us grow and learn.
Absolutely. And I think, failure is such an important aspect, right? A lot of people see failure as good, but I see it as continuing to grow. And if it weren't for those mistakes, right, you wouldn't have seen those different perspectives of opportunities, to improve, right? And I just want to comment quickly on what you kind of spoke about, in terms of regulating those emotions and like the power of mindfulness. I also took a course as well on it. And if you have that mind that's very steady and strong and able to stay grounded during those hard moments is super crucial. And I think there's a time and place for deep reflection, maybe after the game, right? Of you dropping the ball and having a boundary of, maybe 5 minutes, you don't need to think about it for hours. But yeah, during your practice or your game, learn to teach your mind, to let go right away in that moment. So learn to teach yourself to be very present, right? And mindfulness has a huge impact on that. So I'm really happy that you shared that example. Something that I want to lead to next, which mindfulness could kind of tie into that there, is visualization, right? It's so important. That's creating or kind of recreating athletic experiences in your mind, right? And that could be with seeing, that could be with hearing, feeling, smelling, tasting. And this is key, for the purpose of enhancing our performance. This was a method actually used by, Michael Phelps, right? And he did that for, 23 gold medals that he won. So a question that I have is, how and when in training and competition can an athlete mentally rehearse how they see themselves when performing the activity?
How and when? So, that obviously will depend on the person. When we always want to do it before, right? And visualization can be very powerful because it can help with confidence, right? If you can see yourself succeed, if you can kind of premeditate or prepare for something you're about to do in a positive way, that totally helps with your preparation and confidence going into something. So, there's some athletes I work with that will start their visualization like a week before an event, right? And again, it always comes down to practice. So would visualize before your training sessions of how do you want to show up? How do you want to execute certain tasks or roles? And, the conversation I have a lot is about, if you visualize yourself making a mistake, is that okay? And I always say, yes, it's fine as long as you can visualize yourself coming back from that mistake. And sometimes it's really useful and there's research on, visualizing the worst case scenario and seeing yourself go through those obstacles, because again, it gives you confidence that if it comes up, well, you kind of know what to do to manage it versus again, if it just comes up and you didn't plan for it, just like the self-talk, we're just going to react. So when could range from the night before, a week before, or just daily. It's a skill that has to be practiced like everything else, to, the moments before you start your performance or event or game or training. So I think most people just want to implement it for the first time before a game. And I really strongly suggest that they don't. I'm no, just practice this sometimes before bed. And I think when you're in a relaxed position, it will be easier to do the visualization. So all of my clients meditate. I tend to pair it with that. So I'm okay, when you do your meditation practice, once you're done the meditation and you're calm and relaxed, take a few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes to visualize while you're calm, because just like any new habit and like meditation as well, it's hard to just stop and start a visualization or stop and start a meditation. So, I suggest that people put it in their calendar, even like, when are you doing it doesn't have to be half an hour. It could start with 2 minutes, just like, the meditation. It's like, if you haven't visualized before, baby steps. So maybe 2 to 5 minutes, put it in your calendar to make sure you do it. Again, it could be every day, it could be multiple times a week, but it definitely has to be more frequent than just like before a game, if you want it to work, right? And visualization could be really complex. There's a PETLEP model, and PETLEP's PETTLEP stands for the different components of visualization. So it could be physical, environmental, the tasks, the timing, learning, emotion, and perspective. And these are all things that, like, for example, someone who bobsleds or does skeleton will be really good at this because they have no choice but to visualize, since they're only on the track for a certain amount of times a year. But like a master visualizer will be able to like even feel things, right? And that takes practice, and not everyone will get to that level, and that's okay. I read research that everyone's peak in terms of that skill can differ. But all that to say, in terms of the when, I mean, the more often, the better, but usually it would be before, because we're preparing in order to feel confident that we can execute and show up and do what we want to do.
Awesome. Great. So kind of having some daily rituals or practices and staying consistent, right? You can't just do it randomly once, before a game. You have to have that ongoing. So during your practice as well as in the games, and over time, you'll kind of develop like the right experience as well as feeling for it, right?
Exactly. And I find that with beginners, and I think we've all visualized, whether it was just like, okay, where did I put my keys? Like we've all done it to some extent, I think. But what really helps beginner visualizers for performance is writing a script. Because sometimes we leave out the important details. So then I just get them to sit down and like write in words what you want to visualize. And from there, let's turn it into images. And usually that's really helpful.
Awesome. Okay, great. So something that I want to ask you, we spoke a lot about different mental performance topics, but you've worked with a lot of high level athletes. What do you think separates a good athlete from a great athlete?
I mean, I think our conversation highlights what separates a good athlete from a great athlete. And, at the highest level, the physical, technical, tactical is usually the same. And what separates, I might be biased, but, I think what separates the good from great is the mindset. Like you can be the strongest, but if you choke under pressure, like forget it, you're not showing up. Right. And so, especially those athletes or people who can, or who have the opportunity to practice, mindset strategies or develop self-awareness from an early age, for sure, that helps that helps them a lot. And I don't know if I have a specific story, but I'm thinking right away of one rugby athlete that I worked with at a university level. I was doing my stage or my field experience, and I made it mandatory for the team, for everyone on the team, to meet me at least once. Anyway, this one person was really interested and kept, saw me more than the others. And fast forward to now, he's a professional athlete. He's with the Rugby Canada Sevens team. But all that to say, he was always interested in working on his mindset. And those years of practice and thinking about mindset performance helped him for sure get to where he is now. And I'm not saying it's the only thing. Obviously, there's a lot involved getting to a high level. But I think that was one of the factors that helped him get to that level, especially with a sport like rugby in Canada, that you're a very small, I mean, in general, it's a very small percentage of athletes that make it to that level, but rugby specifically is not a popular sport in Canada. So yeah, I mean, again, I might be biased, but I think the mindset definitely is a big part of it for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you for sharing that story. And I think it sums up that it's key to have a strong brain as well as a strong body, right? And connecting those together, right? So a really great athlete needs both of those, right? And they can't just have one or the other, they tie in together. So something that I want to lead to next, the purpose of this podcast is to inspire millions of people to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. So what is your definition of greatness?
It's learning to be your best self, but authentically, right? And for me personally, it's an interesting question you asked. Usually the questions I get are like, oh, what's your mantra or cue cues that you use or motivational quote. And for me, I have 3 words: passion, courage, and groundedness. And those 3 words help me be my best self, which leads to greatness. So really what I'm trying to say is greatness to me, it can look like and feel like different things to everyone, but essentially what I believe it is showing up as your best self, considering everything we talked about today, right? The overtraining, the boundaries, learning to say no, learning to rest, learning to be resilient, because everyone struggles, everyone has their challenges. So learning how to manage all these things in a way that's authentic to you, staying true to yourself, and being able to show up as your best, not just in sport, but in everyday life. And so that takes a lot of awareness and checking in with yourself. It takes support as well, right? We can't achieve, I don't believe we can achieve great things alone. I think our support network is a huge part of it. So it's one thing to manage challenges and, have a proper mindset, but the people around you for sure have a huge impact on how you show up.
I think that's a beautiful definition. What I kind of summarize from that is, to be your best, you got to feel your best. And to be able to feel your best, you have to be able to be human, and you have to be able to not just do it alone. Like you said, have support systems, whether that's personal strategies and tools, or whether that's having a team of other individuals be there for you, lift you up. So I really appreciated that definition. So who is a future guest that you would like to see on this show?
I don't know if I have a specific person, but we kind of chatted about it before we pressed record here. But I think just, having any elite performer speak about their struggles and challenges can be so powerful, because I have the opportunity to have these conversations in team settings, but I realize that people don't recognize that everyone is struggling and going through his challenge. And the more we talk about that, the more we can help each other. And the more we normalize these things, the easier it is to go through them. So I think I would love to see you interview, more. It doesn't even have to be high level, really. It's just anyone who wants to be open to speaking about their challenges and how they overcome them. Because like I said, everyone goes through them, and just sharing these stories and sharing these different ways you get through these things will definitely help other people out. So maybe it's a bonus if you can interview a high level or professional athlete for them to talk about that. But I think anyone's story can be powerful and will connect with someone else.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate that recommendation. I will keep an eye out of some pretty empowering stories, where someone could share, those struggles and those challenges and how they kind of overcame it, and kind of combated them. So that's awesome. I really appreciate that. Where is the best place, for my listeners to connect with you online and follow your work?
Yeah. So on Instagram, it's coach.camcharb. So coach.camcharb. And I have a website, peakperform.ca. And you can find my email address on those 2 platforms. I'm more active on Instagram. I try to give tools, tips, storytelling on there to help my audience recognize not just the tools and strategies they can use, but the challenges that even I go through. So hopefully I inspire and connect with people to have an impact. So Instagram or my website.
That's awesome, Cam. So I'll be sure to, provide all those links there in the podcast episode bio. That way, if people are trying to figure out where to go, it will be right there. And I want to take this last moment of time, to really thank you for being here. Thank you for discussing, I think, some key topics that will add a lot of value to people. I've learned a lot on this episode, and I'm sure a lot of people listening have as well. I just want to take this last moment to really thank you.
Thank you, Ben. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to the Living Your Greatness podcast. If this show has added value, please subscribe, leave a rating, and make a review.